1. 1. System activation. The story's finally starting. I wonder if I actually have some kind of system. Outside the Yukihira restaurant, a young man watched everything unfolding inside. The young man's name was Yuki, a transmigrator. Before arriving here, he'd run a small eatery by himself. As for how he crossed over, pure, rotten luck. The gas supplier he'd been working with went out of business. So Yuki was forced to switch. Turns out, the new place was shady. And their propane tanks were faulty. Yuki's last memory before transmigration was a propane tank suddenly exploding. And then nothing. When he regained consciousness, Yuki found he'd become an infant. Before Yuki could even fully accept his new identity, the parents he'd barely known in this life passed away one after another due to accidents. It reminded Yuki of a common saying from the novels he used to read. Being the parent of a transmigrator is a high-risk profession. Looking back, that statement seemed pretty damn accurate. From then on, Yuki was an orphan. Fortunately for him, his parents in this life had worked at the Totsuki resort, and in fairly high positions. So they left him a substantial amount of assets. Furthermore, his parents had been good friends with Jin Dojima. When Yuki was born, Dojima was only 23 years old. At that time, while Dojima held a respectable position, he hadn't yet become the head chef of the Totsuki resort, nor was he a member of the board. Yuki's parents had helped Dojima quite a bit when he first joined the resort. So, after their passing, Dojima looked after Yuki quite well. And once Yuki was a bit older, Dojima arranged for him to enroll in Totsuki Culinary Academy. Yuki was quite familiar with the world of food wars. After all, besides running his eatery, his biggest hobbies had been reading web novels, manga, and watching movies. So, he knew food wars very well. Realizing this was that world, Yuki worked extremely hard to improve his cooking skills, especially since chefs in this world could even awaken special abilities. Before crossing over, Yuki had run that small eatery. While he wouldn't claim his skills were amazing, his fundamentals were decent. So, after entering Totsuki, Yuki's cooking improved rapidly. Because of this, his skills now ranked among the top students in his year. Of course, he couldn't compare to the truly overpowered ones, like Arina Nakiri, although the god tongue had significant drawbacks. Before it went out of control, it was indeed an incredible ability for a chef. A recipe you spent ages developing could be completely analyzed by the god tongue in just one bite. Finding flaws in dishes and constantly refining them. This takes an enormous amount of time for normal chefs. But for Arina Nakiri, with her god tongue, identifying flaws took only a single taste. Afterward, she could focus all her energy on how to fix them, saving a massive amount of time and effort. Besides her, many other students in their year possessed special talents, like Ikumi Mito's sense of touch or Akira Hayama's sense of smell. While these talents hadn't quite reached the level of true special abilities, they were still far superior to those of the average person. So, even though Yuki had lived a whole extra life and deliberately honed his cooking skills from a young age, he was currently just one of the top students in his year. His current skill level was roughly equivalent to students like Yuki Yoshino and Ryoko Saki in the Polar Star Dormitory. Incidentally, Yuki was also a resident of the Polar Star Dormitory now. It wasn't something he intentionally sought out. Jin Dojima had arranged it. Dojima himself was an alumnus of Polar Star. So naturally, he'd send a promising talent like Yuki there. Thus, Yuki became one of the earliest members of his generation to join the dorm. Over the years, Besides constantly improving his cooking, Yuki had also been searching for his own system. The standard equipment for any transmigrator. After all, but after more than a decade, his system still hadn't appeared, which left Yuki somewhat disappointed. Despite the disappointment, he hadn't given up. Today, he was here at the Yukihira restaurant specifically to see if his system might require the main storyline to begin before activating. After all, the activation methods for systems in the novels he'd read were wildly varied. Besides activating immediately, needing the plot to start was one of the more common triggers. Of course, Yuki wasn't entirely sure, so, just in case, he'd spent basically every day of this break watching the Yukihira restaurant, planning to witness the story's beginning firsthand and see if he truly had a system. And so, he now witnessed Soma Yukihira dealing with Yako Minagasaki using his cooking. This world did have some differences from the Food Wars Yuki knew. The biggest selling point of Food Wars was always how the food had an effect like a drug, sending people into fits of ecstasy. But since Yuki got here, he hadn't seen anything like that. Even Soma Yukihira couldn't produce dishes like that here. Additionally, the Nakiri family's imparting ability didn't exist either. Yuki actually thought it was good these things were gone. He didn't plan on dying alone. He was a normal guy. After all, over the years at Polar Star, Yuki's relationship with Megumi Tadokara had warmed up quickly. He had helped her a lot, even managing to fix her tendency to get nervous. They were boyfriend and girlfriend now. So, Yuki was quite relieved that the imparting and mind-altering effects were gone. Those things were impossible to defend against. Especially the Nakiri's imparting, a totally cheap move. However, the Nakiri family did retain one special ability: their own clothes bursting phenomenon. Yuki didn't really have a problem with this ability existing. If clothes were bursting, it was their own clothes, which had absolutely nothing to do with him or anyone else. Detected story commencement. Phishing system activating. Transmitting system information. Just as Yuki witnessed the beginning of the story, a mechanical voice suddenly sounded in his mind, followed by a virtual screen appearing before his eyes. The voice startled Yuki for a moment, but when he snapped back to reality, his face lit up with joy. Finally, the system had activated. It really exists. I knew it. As a transmigrator, you've gotta get at least one cheat, right? Quote, Yuki silently remarked while looking at the virtual screen, then focused his full attention on the system. Less than greater than 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 tilde hash. Keep the chapters coming. Support with Power Stones. Tilde hash. Every 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. 2. Chef levels. After the system transmitted its information, Yuki understood its function. The phishing system, as the name suggested, was for phishing. However, the phishing spot wasn't in the outside world but within a special space. Inside this special space was a large pond filled with multicolored liquid. Beside the pond rested a fishing rod. This space was called the fishing space, and fishing took place here. From this pond, he could fish out various treasures, and these treasures would always be the ones most suitable for Yuki. Additionally, this space also served as storage. Not only could it hold the items he fished out, but Yuki could also store other things inside it, ready to be retrieved at any time. Furthermore, all items within this space would be in a state of time stasis. Simply put, if you put a dish inside, No matter how long it was stored. It would be exactly the same when taken out as when it was put in. Another point. The space couldn't store living things. But even so, Yuki was already extremely satisfied with having such a space. Although the space didn't look very large right now, it would expand as he grew. As for its limit, Yuki didn't know. The system's information hadn't mentioned anything about that. The existence of the fishing space was already a pleasant surprise for Yuki. But the system's functions didn't stop there. To fish for various treasures in the pond, he needed bait. There were 4 types of bait in total: small bait, large bait, super bait, and growth bait. Acquiring this bait was also very simple. The system would provide 1 small bait daily, 1 large bait monthly, and 1 super bait annually. The most special was the growth bait. Growth bait couldn't be obtained automatically. Yuki needed to improve himself. As for how to improve, the system had already compiled some information based on Yuki's specific situation when it activated. Right now, Yuki was a chef, so his growth would naturally be linked to chef levels. According to the system's assessment, Yuki was currently at the intermediate chef level. This was based on the chef ranking system of the Food Wars world. In the manga, the chef levels in the Food Wars world weren't clearly defined. But after coming to this world, Yuki discovered that the chef ranking system here was actually very specific. Chefs in this Food Wars world were divided into 7 levels: junior, intermediate, senior, third class, second class, first class, and special class. The third, second, first, and special class rankings corresponded to the WGO officers. Whatever class an officer held, that was their culinary level. Yuki was currently just an intermediate chef. But even so, he ranked among the top students in his year at Totsuki. Junior chefs were the most common type. The vast majority of chefs in ordinary restaurants fell into this category. Intermediate chefs. Currently, most of the non-elite 10 top students attending Totsuki were at this level. Senior chefs. The current elite 10 members at Totsuki were all at this level. Even many elite 10 graduates remained at this level for the first 2 or 3 years after graduation. Of course, exceptional graduates, like Joichiro Yukihira and Jin Dojima, had already reached the third-class chef level by the time they graduated. Currently, Joichiro Yukihira had even become a special-class chef. As for Jin Dojima, because he was preoccupied with managing the Totsuki resort, he had fallen considerably behind Joichiro and was now a first-class chef. The vast majority of graduates needed 2 or 3 years after graduation to become third-class chefs, and that was assuming their development went smoothly. If they encountered special circumstances, like Kojiro Shinomiya did, it could take even longer, or they might even stagnate completely. As for second-class chefs, only a very small number of Totsuki graduates ever reached this level. It wasn't a level you could reach just by grinding away over time. Even among the chefs produced by Totsuki's survival of the fittest system, only a select few could reach this tier. More often, they remained stuck at the third-class level for their entire lives. The further up the ranks, the harder it became to improve. Talented individuals like Joichiro Yukihira had reached the special class. But those without sufficient talent could get stuck at a certain level forever. Getting stuck at third class was still the reality for many Totsuki graduates. For ordinary people, most would remain stuck at the intermediate or even junior chef level for life. Even Yuki himself knew very well that without the system's help, his ceiling was probably third-class chef. Don't be fooled by how well he seemed to be doing at Totsuki now. Ranking among the top of the jewel generation. But that was with the accumulated experience from his previous life stacked on top. Although he had only run a small eatery in his past life and hadn't accumulated vast experience, his mindset was that of an adult. Even though many chefs trained from childhood, Yuki's adult mentality gave him a distinct advantage in this regard. Yet, even with that advantage, he had only managed to reach his current level. This just showed how much talent mattered for chefs in this world. Yuki could leverage his advantage early on. But the further he progressed, the harder it became, especially when facing the geniuses in the Polar Star dormitory. Those guys improved way too fast. Satoshi Ishiki and Megumi Tadokura were prime examples. Especially Megumi. After overcoming her nervousness problem, her growth rate skyrocketed. Within the entire Polar Star dormitory, only Satoshi Ishiki, being a year ahead, could still keep Megumi in check. As for everyone else, Megumi had already left them in the dust. This didn't surprise Yuki. After all, Megumi's talent shown in the original story was immense. If not for her nervousness wasting so much time, she would have been even stronger than the likes of Akira Hayama. Right now, among their peers, only Arina Nakiri could possibly suppress Megumi. Mainly because the god tongue was basically a super cheat code when it came to cooking. Yuki was currently an intermediate chef. To obtain growth bait, he needed to become a senior chef. Right now, Yuki had 3 baits in hand. 1 small bait, 1 large bait, and 1 super bait, a starter pack. Essentially, they even give you a starter pack. Guess I'll test the waters with the small bait first. After understanding the system's details, Yuki was eager to try his luck fishing right away. Curious about what kind of treasures he might pull out. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. #. Keep the chapters coming. Support with Power Stones. #. Every 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. 3. The haul from 3 baits. Fishing didn't require Yuki to enter the space himself. He could control the rod and bait with his mind. The system's fishing was hardly cumbersome. He just had to cast the baited hook into the pond. The first bait was a small bait. Yuki had no idea what he would catch. He could only wait and see. Soon, the fishing rod twitched. Seeing this, Yuki immediately pulled. As the hook was lifted from the pond, a small white orb of light appeared in the space. The next second, the orb transformed into a set of knives. At the same time, information about the caught item was directly transmitted into Yuki's mind. The 7-star knives? Aren't these Leon's set from Cooking Master Boy? Even small bait can snag something this good? Quote. Yuki was quite surprised after receiving the information. He had assumed small bait was just filler, and the items caught wouldn't be much. He never expected that the small bait he could get daily could land something as good as they. 7-star knives. The 7-star knives were the set used by Leon in the world of Cooking Master Boy. Forged by Rache. In the entire Cooking Master Boy world, there were, strictly speaking, 2.5 sets of 7-star knives. The first set was commissioned by Leon from Rache. After obtaining this set, Leon turned on Rache. The second set differed between the anime and manga. In the anime, it was forged as an offering. In the manga, it was forged to repay Shan. As for the remaining half set, there were also conflicting plot points in the manga. In the first part of the manga, Shan finished off Rache immediately after getting the second set of 7-star knives. But in the second part, Shan didn't attack Rache. Instead, Rache, to repay Shan, insisted on forging a third set after completing the second. However, due to his existing injuries not having fully healed, the continuous high-intensity forging meant he didn't last long enough to complete the third set of 7-star knives before passing away. The set Yuki fished out was the first one. Although it couldn't compare to the set in Leon's hands, which was an amalgamation of the essence of 2 sets, it was still very powerful. After all, besides being able to prepare most ingredients in the world, the 7-star knives had another characteristic: extreme sharpness. When Shan used the second set of 7-star knives, she cut open a fish's belly, and because of the extreme sharpness, the cut belly actually sealed itself back up. Although Yuki felt it was impossible for the 7-star knives to make a fish belly recover perfectly, just being able to achieve that for a short time was enough to prove their sharpness. The appearance of the 7-star knives made Yuki very happy. He hadn't held much hope for this particular cast. However, Yuki couldn't use the 7-star knives just yet. Successfully wielding this set of knives was no easy task. He would need to spend a significant amount of time getting accustomed to them. Of course, none of this was critical right now. What mattered was that Yuki still had 2 more fishing chances. And the next 2 were even more precious. Riding his current good luck, Yuki cast his second line. This time, it was a large bait. Soon, the rod moved again, and the commotion was much bigger than when he used the small bait. As Yuki pulled, a white orb of light several times larger than the previous one was pulled from the water. This time, however, the orb didn't change. Similarly, information flowed into Yuki's mind. Alkan's Inferno. It actually pulled out his ability. Quote, Yuki was even more overjoyed after receiving the information. This was Alkan's talent. Before the Dark Cooking Society appeared, Alkan was known as the continent's #1 master of fire in the world of cooking master boy. And the reason Alkan held such a title was entirely due to this ability. Inferno was incredibly powerful. This ability was different from the special abilities in the Food Wars world. While the abilities in Food Wars were unique, no matter how special, they didn't possess much destructive power. However, Alkan's Inferno has immense destructive power. In the original story, even when Alkan was submerged in water, weakening his Inferno, he could still directly use it to melt the iron chains on Mao's feet. The melting point of iron is over 1500 degrees Celsius. Just thinking about it made Inferno seem terrifyingly strong. If Alkan hadn't become a chef and instead focused on combat, he would have been a bug-like existence. However, this ability also had a clear drawback. It was uncontrollable. Inferno wasn't simply about controlling flames. A person possessing Inferno could emit super strong, high-temperature steam from their body. This high-temperature steam could ignite flammable materials nearby. Even when not actively using the ability, the body's temperature would continuously rise. In the original story, Alkan carried a large amount of cold water with him at all times, precisely to cool down. After receiving the information about this ability, Yuki also understood that it would become dormant when the wielder was asleep. So he didn't have to worry about waking up to a burnt bed. But while the wielder was awake, their body temperature would constantly increase. Although it has a flaw, it's basically negligible. Quote, Yuki knew Inferno had a drawback, but it was an acceptable one. Besides, technology was gradually advancing in this era, and there were plenty of ways to cool down. So, Yuki planned to make his final cast before absorbing Inferno. With the use of the super bait, Yuki's anticipation grew even stronger. After all, super bait could only be obtained once a year. Given his experience with the first two, what he got this time would surely be even better. The commotion from the super bait was much larger than that of the large bait. But Yuki didn't bother paying attention to it and just pulled the rod up directly. Then, a white orb of light, nearly a meter in diameter, floated in midair. Information once again surged into his mind. Whoa, no way. It's food honor, and a version custom tailored for me. This is freaking insane. Super bait really lives up to its name. Quote, after learning what he had fished up, Yuki couldn't help but suck in a sharp breath. The previous 7-star knives in Inferno were already capable of dominating the Food Wars world. But what appeared this time was even more outrageous. Food honor. This was something from the world of Tariko. And even in the world of Tariko, not just anyone could learn food honor. Don't be fooled by how quickly Tariko and Kamatsu learned food honor. They were the main characters. After all, the other people at Shokuran Temple were the true representation of the difficulty. And what Yuki had fished out was a version custom made for him. Not the standard Shokuran Temple version. This was ridiculously overpowered. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. #. Keep the chapters coming. Support with Power Stones. #. Every 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. 4. The overpowered effects of food honor. In the Tariko universe, food honor had entirely different learning methods. Of course, the effects are the same, but the learning process is entirely different. The original story didn't describe in detail how others learned food honor, mainly focusing on Tariko and Kamatsu's process. The food honor they learned was the Shokuran Temple version. The Shokuran Temple version of food honor had the lowest entry barrier. And Chinchin had even developed a systematic learning method for it. Of course, even with the Shokuran Temple version, only the entry became simpler. Very few people could reach the mastery level. In the original story, even the wise masters at Shokuran Temple, who were responsible for teaching, hadn't reached the mastery level of food honor. For Yuki, the Shokuran Temple version wasn't the most suitable. After all, the critical point of that version was gratitude. An almost overwhelming, all-encompassing gratitude. The Shokuran Temple version of food honor had even reached a sort of super high intensity brainwashing effect. At Shokuran Temple, apart from a very few who went there to learn on their own, the vast majority of trainees were real criminals. These criminals were deemed salvageable and were thus sent to Shokuran Temple for rehabilitation. Once the criminals learned Shokuran Temple's food honor, it meant they had been reformed. After all, Shokuran Temple's food honor required genuine gratitude from the heart. Otherwise, one couldn't deceive the temple or its array of special ingredients. Reformed criminals would naturally no longer have criminal thoughts, and they would become very kind people. Yuki couldn't reach the level of Chinchin or Tariko and the others. So the food honor he now possessed was indeed very satisfying to him. The effects of food honor were also incredibly overpowered. In the world of Tariko, food honor was standard for the strong. It allowed people to enhance their control over their bodies. If a person could exert 100 kilograms of force with all their might, once they achieved basic food honor, that same person could directly exert several hundred or even over 1,000 kilograms of force. Furthermore, their control over that power could reach microscopic precision. Every movement would be devoid of wasted actions or excess energy. This was just basic food honor. Once food honor reached the mastery level, a full power strike could unleash dozens of times one's original strength. And control over the body would be further enhanced. Moreover, upon reaching master level food honor, one could learn an ability called food immersion. This ability allowed the user to store energy, far exceeding their normal limits. Even super powerful individuals like Ichiryu used this technique. All three items Yuki fished out were extremely useful to him. After finishing his fishing, Yuki eagerly returned to his lodgings. Next, he would absorb Inferno and food honor. Speaking of which, I wonder if I can control Inferno after I get the basics of food honor down. Quote, just as Yuki was about to integrate Inferno, he suddenly thought of food honor's effects. The enhanced control from food honor could also be applied to energy. The fact that Alkan couldn't control Inferno didn't mean the ability itself was inherently uncontrollable. Thinking this, Yuki chose to integrate food honor first. After integrating food honor, he would then integrate Inferno. Perhaps he could control it, and thus wouldn't have to bother figuring out ways to manage his body temperature. As food honor integrated, a vast amount of information about its training method flooded Yuki's mind. And his own food honor instantly reached the basic level. The moment food honor reached the basic level, Yuki gained an incredibly clear understanding of his own body. In that same instant, he also gained a clear understanding of the various fundamentals of his culinary skills. In just a moment, Yuki knew exactly what flaws existed in his previously practiced fundamentals and immediately made adjustments. As the initial adjustments were completed, Yuki discovered he had gained another bait. This wasn't because a new day had arrived and the system gave him a new small bait. This bait was a growth bait. At this moment, Yuki was no longer an intermediate chef. He had reached the senior chef level. Senior chef, a level at Totsuki generally only attainable by the elite 10. I'm a senior chef already? And this is just the initial application of food honor. Quote, Yuki was incredibly amazed. But on second thought, it made sense. Even in the world of Tariko, food honor was an extremely powerful technique, let alone in the world of food wars. Furthermore, this improvement in his culinary skills was merely the preliminary effect of food honor. As his food honor continuously improved, and as Yuki continued to modify and perfect his own techniques, his rate of improvement would only become faster. Although he had obtained a growth bait, Yuki didn't rush to fish. Instead, he chose to integrate Inferno first, to see if his hypothesis was correct. As the Inferno ability integrated, Yuki's body temperature began to rise continuously, and high-temperature steam constantly billowed from his pores. Yuki could clearly sense the changes happening within his body. However, the next second, the high-temperature steam erupting from his body surface instantly vanished, and his own body temperature quickly returned to the normal human range. It's just as I thought. Although my food honor is only at the basic level, controlling Inferno is no problem at all. Quote, Yuki felt a pleasant surprise as he sensed the controlled power within him. This power was Inferno. Now, he could perfectly control Inferno without needing external means to cool his body. However, what Yuki found slightly regrettable was that while food honor allowed him to control Inferno, it couldn't change the fundamental nature of the ability itself. Although Inferno could control flames to some extent and grant immunity to fire damage, it couldn't create flames out of thin air. But even so, it was enough. After fully learning Inferno, Yuki turned his gaze to the fishing space. He still had a growth bait there. Strictly speaking, Growth bait was even more precious than super bait. After all, super bait could be accumulated over time. But growth bait could only be obtained by improving his own culinary skills. Currently, he knew of only 7 chef ranks in the Food Wars world. And since the system hadn't activated when he became a junior and intermediate chef, strictly speaking, he could only obtain 5 growth baits. Of course, this was all based on the premise of the chef ranking system in the Food Wars world. Food Wars was destined not to be Yuki's final stop. With the system, he was destined to surpass the world of Food Wars. So he would be able to obtain more growth baits. But even so, the quantity of growth bait was fated to be the smallest among the 4 types of bait. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. #. Keep the chapters coming. Support with Power Stones. #. Every 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. 5. The result of the growth bait. As the growth bait was consumed, a ball of light was soon pulled from the water. At the same time, information about it flowed into Yuki's mind. The item fished out by the growth bait was an evolving touch for one of the 5 senses. Once integrated, Yuki's sense of touch would continuously develop along with his own improvement. Similar to the fishing space itself. It's actually a growth type ability. Quote, Yuki was astonished. This ability didn't specify an upper limit to its growth, meaning his sense of touch could potentially develop to the level of a demon king from the world of Tariko, or even stronger. Thinking of this, Yuki eagerly integrated the evolving touch. After integration, Yuki noticed some changes in his body, though they weren't immediately distinct. He tried touching the table. The next second, detailed data about the table fed back to him. Weight, size, various parameters, all accounted for. Yuki could even sense the table's internal structure and degree of decay. Of course, there was one thing Yuki didn't know: the material of the table. The feedback from his enhanced touch was comprehensive, but he also needed the relevant knowledge base. It was like Arina Nakiri's God's Tongue. While the God's Tongue could detect various flaws in a dish and even easily dissect its preparation method, it also required its possessor to have sufficient knowledge. Arina Nakiri's God's Tongue could discern the difference between souls from different regions only, because she had tasted them beforehand. She had tasted these souls in advance and memorized their characteristics. Similarly, various ingredients and seasonings needed to be memorized for her to analyze a dish upon tasting it. Otherwise, even an ability like the God's Tongue would be useless. It was the same for Yuki now. The information he obtained through touch was limited to his existing range of knowledge. For anything beyond that, he needed to supplement his knowledge. For example, he would need to touch various types of wood and memorize their characteristics to identify them by touch alone. He immediately found a small, nearby restaurant. He planned to test if his sense of touch could achieve effects similar to the God's Tongue. Soon, the dishes he ordered arrived. Yuki took a bite directly. Although the sense he had enhanced was touch, not taste, it didn't mean he would physically touch the prepared food with his hands. However, this didn't mean Yuki's tactile ability couldn't be used. He hadn't forgotten that lips are also part of the sense of touch. Through his lips, Yuki could also analyze a dish. As his lips came into contact with the food, just as Yuki had expected, information about the dish was rapidly fed back to his mind through his sense of touch. In that instant, not only were the ingredients and various seasonings used in the dish clearly analyzed, But even the flaws present in the dish and how to improve them were immediately relayed to his mind. Several methods for improvement appeared. Similarly, these methods were based on Yuki's knowledge base. Having lived 2 lives, and with how hard he had worked in this one, his culinary knowledge reserve, if nothing else, was quite substantial. Looks like my sense of touch now is no weaker than the so-called God tongue. No, it should be even stronger than the God tongue. Yuki gained a certain understanding of his tactile abilities level. In terms of functionality, his touch was in no way inferior to the supposed God tongue. In fact, it was likely superior. After all, the God tongue had side effects and was destined to go out of control eventually. But Yuki's sense of touch wouldn't have such problems. At the same time, Yuki understood the importance of talent even more clearly. Having talent versus not having it were 2 completely different concepts. Like the difference between a regular gamer and one using cheats. However, Yuki had now joined the ranks of the cheaters. And his cheat was comparable to a top-tier cheat program. After finishing his meal, Yuki paid the bill and left directly. Since the system was active, his future plans needed to change. Originally, Yuki had thought that if he didn't have a system, he would just diligently get by in school. Graduating would be best. But even if he couldn't, worst case scenario, he could always go work as a chef at Megumi's family's inn. After all, he had already won over Megumi Tadokura. And while he couldn't compare to those with overpowered abilities before, he was at least a pretty skilled chef. Coupled with Megumi's future achievements, living a good life wouldn't be a problem at all. But now that the system was active, as a cheat player, he naturally couldn't stick to his previous plan. Honestly, Yuki considered himself a relatively hardworking type. While it wasn't like he lived and breathed cooking every single second, he did spend most of his time on it. He was quite interested in cooking, so he was willing to invest time in it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become an intermediate chef. Now that he had a chance to reach the top, he certainly wouldn't let it go. So, Yuki immediately took out his phone and called an acquaintance. Yuki, it's been a while. You haven't contacted me in some time. Spending all day with your little girlfriend. Are we? Quote, soon. A robust voice came from the phone, though its tone was somewhat teasing. Uncle Dojima, I've been busy with serious matters lately, working hard to improve my cooking skills. By the way, there's something I'd like to ask of you. The person Yuki contacted was Jin Dojima. Due to his parents' past relationship with him, Dojima's connection with Yuki was very good. What is it that made you take the initiative to ask for something? Quote, Jin Dojima on the other end sounded a bit surprised by Yuki's words. He had watched Yuki grow up and knew him very well. Yuki wasn't one to trouble others. He was very mature for his age and liked to rely on himself for many things. Even though Dojima held a high position at Totsuki, Yuki had never leveraged his influence. Yuki was someone who understood boundaries very well, which was why Dojima thought highly of him, and their relationship had become so strong. In Dojima's eyes, his relationship with Yuki was less like that of a senior guiding a junior, and more like that of an older brother looking out for his younger sibling. Less than greater than 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 less than greater than. #. Keep the chapters coming. Support with Power Stones. #. Every 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter.